The power of presence is something that cannot be faked, cannot be fabricated, and cannot be silenced. When you walked into that space, something shifted. The air grew thick with truth, and the atmosphere began to tremble with a quiet knowing. You were not simply a person arriving in an ordinary moment. You were the embodiment of an answer, the physical form of a divine whisper that had been ignored too many times. Your presence was not loud, yet it echoed through every corner of their spirit. You carried with you the weight of all the prayers that had been spoken over their life, all the warnings that had been dismissed, and all the signs they had pretended not to see. Your very existence became a message that could not be turned away from, because you were not a suggestion. You were a command from heaven that said, "This is the moment." You did not have to raise your voice or fight to be heard, because presence is more powerful than noise. It demands recognition, it interrupts comfort, it awakens what has been asleep. Your presence was not just flesh and bone walking into the room. It was spirit, it was energy, it was the light that makes darkness scatter. You did not know, in the beginning, that you were carrying something sacred. You only knew that something felt heavy inside you, something that could not be ignored, something that told you to stay when staying was hard, and to speak when silence felt safer. This was not coincidence, this was calling. You were chosen to be the one who would stand as living proof that the old way could no longer continue. Every smile you offered, every boundary you drew, every tear you shed, all of it carried a divine assignment. You were there to stir a soul that had been buried beneath its own illusions. You were there to shake the foundation of a life built on falsehood. You were there as the living evidence that grace still gives chances before judgment comes. The power of your presence was not in what you said, but in what you represented. You represented truth. You represented freedom. You represented the end of pretending. And because of that, everything you did, even the simple act of being there, became a wake-up call. They could ignore a sermon. They could ignore advice. They could even ignore the quiet voice inside their own heart. But they could not ignore you. Your presence was the trumpet that sounded at the edge of the cliff. It was the hand that pointed to the crossroads. It was the final bell that said time was running out. And when you finally walked away, the silence you left behind was louder than any word you had ever spoken. The sacred mirror is never easy to hold, because it does not simply show the surface. It shows the soul. When you came into their life, you did not just stand before them as another person. You became the reflection they could not escape. In your laughter, they saw the joy they had long forgotten. In your tears, they saw the pain they had caused. In your strength, they saw the courage they lacked. And in your boundaries, they saw the truth they had been running from. You became the mirror that did not flatter, the mirror that did not lie, the mirror that showed them who they truly were when all the masks were stripped away. You were not sent to shame them, but to reveal to them that there was still time to turn around. You became their proof that love could still be offered, that compassion could still be found, that honesty could still be spoken in a world full of silence. But sacred mirrors are heavy, and they cut deep, for they show not only beauty but also the brokenness. They saw themselves in you, not the self they presented to the world, but the raw, unpolished self they kept hidden. They saw the child inside them crying for help. They saw the wounds they never allowed to heal. They saw the choices they had made and the trail of pain they had left behind. And for a moment, perhaps the first in a long time, they could not look away. They could not laugh it off. They could not charm it away. They could not hide behind excuses. Your presence became a living reminder that the way they had been living was no longer sustainable. You showed them that the game they had been playing had an end, and that end was now. This is why you were resisted. This is why you were attacked, because people do not easily forgive the mirror that makes them see themselves. Yet even as they fought against you, the reflection stayed. Every act of kindness, every stand you took for yourself, every time you refused to shrink, you held the mirror higher. And though it may not have been visible at first, the cracks in their armor began to show. They were faced with a choice: either turn away from the truth you reflected or begin the work of transformation. And whether they chose to change or chose to run, one thing was certain. They could never again say they did not know who they were. The sacred mirror had been placed in front of them, and once a soul sees its own reflection, it can never return to the blindness it once lived in. You were that mirror, and in being so, you became the line that divided who they were from who they could still become. The thunder before the storm breaks is not a gentle sound. It rolls in with a warning, a trembling in the air, a vibration that says something is about to shift. You are that sound in their life, the deep rumble that could no longer be ignored. Long before the sky opened and the rain came, your presence carried the weight of what was to come. You were the tremor under their feet, the voice that whispered through the silence, the undeniable signal that the season of pretending was reaching its end. You did not even have to raise your voice, because the energy around you spoke for itself. Something in the way you loved, something in the way you drew your line, something in the way you stood unshaken told them that a reckoning was near. You were the prelude to change, the divine announcement that said the days of getting away with everything were numbered. Thunder does not break the sky, but it shakes the ground enough to make even the most stubborn heart look up. You were the sound that made them glance toward heaven, the sound that forced them to notice that the storm clouds were gathering whether they wanted them to or not. And like thunder, you were not meant to destroy, but to warn, to call attention, to give them one last chance to prepare for what was coming. Your every word carried a vibration that traveled deeper than the ear, landing in the soul where it could not be forgotten. Your silence was just as loud, for even in the moments when you said nothing, the air around you spoke volumes. There is a holy tension in thunder, that split second where everything feels suspended, and you brought that same pause into their life. You interrupted the rhythm they had grown used to, the pattern of control, the endless cycle of denial. You made them feel that something was shifting, that something inside them could no longer stay asleep. And as the thunder kept rolling, they were faced with a choice. Either heed the warning or brace themselves for the storm that would follow. Some tried to dismiss you, tried to laugh at the sound, tried to convince themselves that the sky was still clear. But thunder is never mistaken. It comes only when the storm is near. You were the voice of that truth, the sign that the time of reckoning was no longer a distant threat, but a present reality. And when the storm finally came, when the rain washed away the illusions and the lightning split the sky, they would remember that you were the one who sounded the first call. You were the rumble that made them shiver, the echo that stayed in their chest long after you were gone, the thunder that told them everything was about to change forever. The teacher they never asked for is often the one they needed the most, and you became that lesson in flesh and spirit. You did not come with a classroom, a chalkboard, or a lecture. You came with life itself, with moments that spoke louder than any textbook ever could. You were sent not to punish but to teach, not to lecture but to reveal, not to condemn but to awaken. You became the living syllabus of their transformation, each encounter with you writing a line in the curriculum of their soul. Your kindness taught them what love should look like, even when they struggled to receive it. Your boundaries taught them that respect is not optional, that access to another's heart is a privilege, not a right. Your pain taught them that actions have consequences, that words can wound deeply, that choices leave imprints on other lives. They may have resisted your lessons, may have mocked them, may have tried to discredit the teacher standing before them, but life has a way of making sure its greatest lessons are learned, even if it takes time. You showed them that growth is not comfortable, and that accountability is not cruelty. You taught them that there is strength in walking away, that silence can speak louder than shouting, that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and that mercy does not mean permission. You were not always gentle, and that was part of the lesson too. Sometimes the teacher must be firm so that the student understands the weight of what is at stake. You became the exam they could not cheat on, the moment of truth they could not avoid, the chapter that forced them to stop and face themselves. Even when they thought they were unaffected, the seed of your teaching was planted deep within them, and seeds have a way of growing long after they are buried. Long after you were gone, your words, your actions, your refusal to be broken would echo in their memory like a refrain they could not unhear. And though they never asked for you, though they may have resented the lessons you brought, one day they would come to see that your presence was a gift. You were the mentor they did not know they needed, the reminder that the world does not bend to every whim, that love is both tender and fierce, that truth will stand even when it costs everything. Your life became a lesson plan written by divine hands, and through you they were given one final opportunity to change, to repent, to grow before the door closed. You were the teacher they never asked for, but the one God sent, and your lesson was the turning point they could not escape no matter how far they ran. The closing of a chapter is never a quiet thing for the soul. It is a moment heavy with both grief and grace, a moment that carries the weight of all that has been and the whisper of what is yet to come. You were the one chosen to stand at that threshold, to be the final line written before the page turned. Every step you took, every decision you made, every moment you chose to stay and every moment you chose to leave was part of this holy ending. You were not there to drag the story longer than it was meant to last. You were there to seal it, to make sure that nothing unfinished was left lurking in the shadows. There is a strange kind of beauty in endings, because they are not just about loss but about clarity. When you walked away, you marked a moment in time that could never be undone. You became the period at the end of a long and painful sentence, the exhale after years of holding breath, the voice that said enough when enough had finally come. You did not just walk out of their life. You closed the door behind you, and that sound echoed. It echoed in their mind, in their spirit, in the very foundations of who they were, because endings are loud even when they are done in silence. You became the line that separated who they were before you from who they had to become after you. In your leaving, you forced a reckoning, not because you wanted revenge, but because your spirit knew the chapter could not remain open any longer. There is a sacredness to closure, a holiness to finishing what has run its course. You were the one who brought that moment into being. You showed them what finality looks like, what accountability feels like, what the loss of something pure can do to the heart. And in that closing, you freed not only yourself but them as well, because as long as the chapter remained open, the same cycle could repeat. The same patterns could keep spinning, the same story could keep writing itself over and over again. But when you closed it, you broke the cycle. You said with your life that the pain could stop here, the confusion could end here, the chaos could rest. You became the signpost that pointed to a new way, even if they did not yet take it. The chapter closed not in anger but in inevitability, because destiny had decided it was time. And though they may have felt the sting of your absence, they also felt the weight of what your presence had meant. You were the last word on that page, and your departure was the invitation to start again, to pick up a pen and write a different story, to face what was left behind and choose a new beginning. The divine assignment is never random, never careless, never without purpose. You were chosen before you even knew you were walking into a battle that was bigger than you. There was a reason your path crossed theirs, a reason your spirit felt the pull to stay longer than your flesh wanted to, a reason you were called to love even when it cost you pieces of yourself. You were not simply living through chaos. You were fulfilling something written over your life before you were ever born. Your assignment was to stand in a place where others had fallen silent, to hold up a light in a house that had grown dark, to be the reminder that grace still knocks before the storm comes to sweep everything away. You were sent as a messenger, though you did not always feel like one. Some days you felt like a warrior, some days like a healer, some days like the one who was breaking instead of building. But every moment you stood in truth. Every time you refused to lose yourself. Every time you loved without becoming a doormat. You were completing what heaven had sent you to do. The divine assignment is rarely easy, because it is not about comfort, it is about transformation. You were there to deliver an opportunity, one last invitation to change, to repent, to rise higher. You were there to hold up a mirror that showed what could no longer be ignored, to offer love that called for growth, to bring boundaries that drew a line in the sand and said no more. Even your pain had purpose, because your tears watered the ground where a new seed could be planted. You became the living evidence that God had not given up, that mercy was still available, that there was still time to turn around. And when the time came to leave, that too was part of the assignment, because your absence was as powerful as your presence. It was the final page of the lesson, the exclamation point that made them see what they had lost. You were not just a person passing through their story. You were the divine interruption, the holy pause, the last warning before the shift came. And though it cost you something to be there, though it stretched you and scarred you, you were never abandoned in the process. Heaven saw every moment. Heaven recorded every sacrifice. Heaven knew the weight you carried. And now, as you step back and look at it all, you can see that you were part of something sacred. You were not just surviving, you were completing a mission that was written for you. And because you were faithful to it, the story cannot remain the same. You were the divine assignment, and your presence was the turning point their soul could never forget.